She called the sheriff on me for fishing my own shoreline. She called the cops on me for fishing with my kid at sunrise, swearing she controlled the whole lake. That moment set off a war I never asked for, but I wasn't about to bow to a fake HOA queen. So I dug, found the truth buried in old paper and older land rights, and watched her freeze when she learned I owned her entire block. Drop a justice if you've ever stood your ground, and hit subscribe if you want more real stories where the land finally speaks for itself. The sky over Lost Timber Lake was still the color of slate when I stepped onto the dock with my son, Colton. The boards creaked beneath us, old pine softened by years of Montana winters, and the lake lay quiet, flat as hammered glass, mist drifting across it in thin ribbons. You could smell the cold in the air, that clean mineral scent that only shows up before sunrise. Colton sat beside me, kicking his boots lightly against the dock while he threaded a line through his small spinning reel. The kid was 11, but handled a rod like he'd been born with it. "Dad, think we'll catch something before breakfast?" he asked. "Always do," I said, lowering my line into the water. For a few minutes there was nothing but the soft splash of the bobber and the distant croak of a heron somewhere along the shoreline. Peace. Real, honest peace. One of the few reasons I'd moved us out here after the divorce. A small, weathered cabin on 8 acres of lakefront was the kind of quiet I didn't know I'd needed until I had it. Then I heard it, tires crunching on gravel. Colton glanced back. "Someone's coming." A sheriff's cruiser crept up the narrow road, headlights cutting through the thinning morning fog. The engine idled low, a heavy mechanical growl that didn't belong at this hour. The cruiser stopped right above our cabin's dirt driveway, tires pressing into the soft earth. Sheriff Cody Rellan stepped out, hat low, jaw already tense like he dreaded whatever this visit was about. And then I heard the voice that truly soured the morning. "Right there, Cody. That's him. That's the trespasser." Linda Harwood, HOA president, terror of Lost Timber Lake, and self-appointed queen of property values, stood on her meticulously manicured patch of lawn, wearing a bright wine-red jacket and expensive hiking boots that had never touched a real trail. Her hair was pulled tight, high and stiff, ready for confrontation. "Linda," I muttered. "Of course it's Linda." She marched toward us, pointing like she was calling out a bank robber instead of a father and son fishing. "Sheriff, I need you to remove this man from community property, immediately." Rellan sighed through his nose, the kind of sigh law enforcement makes when they've been dragged into neighbor drama for the 100th time. He walked to the dock, boots thudding on old wood. "Morning, Evan," he said cautiously. "Linda here says you're fishing on HOA-controlled lake frontage." I kept my voice even. "This is my dock, Cody, my shoreline. You pass it every time you drive the loop." Linda scoffed loudly. "That dock extends into community water. Our bylaws clearly state—" "Your bylaws," I cut in, "don't override county plats or state water access rights." Linda's eyes flashed. "Stop pretending you don't know the rules here. I've sent 3 notices about lake usage. You can't just fish wherever you want, whenever you want. This lake is governed." "By who?" I asked. "You." She lifted her chin. "By the Lake Harmony Residential Association, which I happen to lead." Colton shifted closer to me. I squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. The sheriff scratched the back of his neck. "Evan, she filed an official complaint. Says you're ignoring multiple directives. Says this shoreline is, her wording, community-regulated space." "She's wrong," I said. "Calm. Always calm. That's how you win against people like Linda." Linda stepped closer, practically vibrating with authority that didn't actually exist. "Sheriff, I expect you to enforce the rules. He needs to vacate the water. Now." Rellan looked caught between us, the mist swirling around his boots like the lake itself didn't want him involved. He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Evan, maybe just step back from the dock for a minute. Let's sort this out without it turning into something messy." "No," I said gently, because stepping back tells her she's right. Linda threw her hands up. "Oh, for heaven's sake, don't make this difficult. This is a simple matter of compliance." The lake stayed quiet, a mirror reflecting pale, early light, as if waiting for my answer. I reeled in my line slowly, the crank echoing. Then I leaned toward the sheriff, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Sheriff," I said, "this isn't her lake." I paused. "She just doesn't know it yet." Cody's brow furrowed, confused, wary, sensing something deeper under the surface. Linda didn't hear me, but she would. Soon. Because the ground she thought she ruled, it belonged to someone else entirely. And that someone was standing right here on this dock. But that wasn't where the story began. It started 6 months earlier, on a crisp September afternoon, when I first turned off the county highway and followed that winding dirt road through tall lodgepole pines toward Lost Timber Lake. The dust rolled behind my truck in long, slow waves, the way it does when no one's driven a road for hours. I remember thinking how peaceful it all felt. The air sharp, the lake half hidden through the trees, sparkling like hammered silver under the Montana sun. Colton sat in the passenger seat with his backpack in his lap. He stared through the window at the pine silhouettes and the log cabins scattered along the shore. "It's quiet here," he whispered. "That's the point," I told him. The cabin, ours now, sat on 8 acres of untouched shoreline. Weathered wood, green metal roof, porch facing the lake. When I first stepped out of the truck, the boards on the front steps groaned under my boots, and the wind carried the smell of spruce and cold water. After the divorce, after the years of running water infrastructure projects in 3 different states, quiet felt like a luxury I'd almost forgotten. I spent the first 2 days repairing loose shutters and hauling out old furniture the previous owner left behind. The lake was a living thing outside the porch window, blue, calm, reflective, changing with every shift of cloud cover. Occasionally a loon called across the water, long and hollow, echoing through the trees. Colton explored the shoreline, skipping stones and collecting pine cones like trophies. But on the 3rd morning, peace cracked. I heard heels, actual heels, clicking on my wooden deck, sharp, precise, impatient. When I stepped outside, Linda Harwood stood with her hands folded over a thick binder and a glossy smile that didn't reach her heavily lined eyes. "Mr. Mercer, welcome to our community," she said, though her tone made it sound more like a warning than a greeting. She wore hiking boots now, but they still looked too clean to be real. Her maroon jacket caught the sunlight like varnished paint. I wiped my hands on my jeans. "Morning. Can I help you?" She flipped open her binder immediately. "This visit is just routine. You're required to complete orientation for the Lake Harmony Residential Association. Dues are $600 a year due now. Dock approval must be submitted by Friday, and you'll need to register any guests who plan on using the lake." I blinked. "I just moved in. I haven't signed anything with an HOA." "Oh, it's implied when you purchase lakefront property." Her smile stiffened. "Ask anyone here. The HOA maintains standards. Without us, this place would fall apart." "I own my shoreline," I said, "and my dock. What exactly do your dues cover?" Her eyes hardened. "Community maintenance, lake preservation, neighborhood harmony." "Harmony doesn't usually start with surprise fees," I said. Her binder snapped shut like a slammed door. "Mr. Mercer, everyone participates. It keeps the community pleasant. You wouldn't want to be the neighbor who lowers the tone." She turned on her heel and walked off my deck with the authority of someone who'd been obeyed her entire life. Colton appeared behind me. "Who was that?" Someone who thinks she's in charge, I said, but she isn't. Later that afternoon, a pickup truck rumbled down the road and parked by my gate. Hank Barlow stepped out, 72, tall, spine straight as a fence post, hat worn smooth at the brim. He carried a plate of still warm cornbread and offered it with a kind smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said. His voice had the gravel of someone who'd lived through too many winters without leaving. "Figured you could use this after meeting Linda." I chuckled. "That obvious?" "She's like wildfire," he said. "When she moves in your direction, you feel the heat. Folks around here let her do what she does 'cause they're tired or scared or both. Don't get caught in it." "I'm not sure I have a choice." "You always have a choice," Hank said. "But with Linda, the wrong one costs you peace." He tipped his hat and walked back to his truck, boots crunching in pine needles. That night, as wind brushed through the trees and the moonlight touched the lake in long silver strokes, I replayed Linda's words. Everyone participates. Doc approval. Orientation fees. Standards. Something about the way she said it stuck in my ribs like a splinter. It wasn't community spirit. It was a threat wrapped in neighborly politeness. 2 days later, I found the first envelope in my mailbox. Thick cardstock, gold trim, the kind of thing wedding invitations are made of. I opened it while standing under the porch light, moths tapping soft wings against the glass. Violation number 1. Unauthorized dock presence. A fine of $150. Deadline, immediate. My jaw tightened. I hadn't even finished unpacking boxes. Colton came outside holding a bag of marshmallows. "Dad, can we make a fire?" "We can," I said, folding the violation notice carefully, "but we're going to have to deal with something first." The trees swayed in the night breeze, and somewhere across the lake, a dog barked. The water rippled under the moon like shifting steel. I didn't know it yet, but that piece of paper was only the first match Linda intended to light, and the fire she started was about to scorch her whole kingdom. For now, I tucked the notice into my back pocket and stared out across the lake. The war hadn't started yet, but it soon would. And Linda had no idea who she'd just picked a fight with. The first real hit came at 5:42 the following Saturday morning, one of those pale dawns where the air tastes like cold stone and the lake looks like poured aluminum. I had just stepped onto the porch with a mug of coffee when I heard a sharp knock at the door. Not a neighborly knock, an official knock. 3 precise raps, each harder than the last. When I opened the door, a township inspector stood there with a clipboard tucked under his arm. His jacket smelled like stale coffee and road dust, his pen already clicking. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Got a complaint about unpermitted shoreline work." I blinked. I haven't touched my shoreline. "Complaint says you installed a non-compliant structure." He pointed toward my dock. "That dock's older than I am," I said. He sighed, clearly annoyed. "Sir, let me just take a look so I can close this out." We walked toward the lake, pine needles crunching under our boots. Mist clung to the tops of the fence posts. He inspected the dock, bent down, tapped one of the boards. Then he straightened up slowly. "Yeah," he said with a defeated shrug. "There's nothing wrong here." Of course there wasn't. But the inspector made one comment that stuck with me as he scribbled in his book. "Between you and me, somebody on this road really likes calling us." Somebody. Right. By noon that same day, 2 more complaints arrived via email. Wildlife disturbance, noise violation. I hadn't made a sound louder than a coffee grinder. On Monday, a 3rd complaint showed up accusing me of improper storage of lake equipment. Tuesday brought another envelope, this time tucked carefully into my gate latch like a gift nobody wanted. Violation Socio 2, unregistered lakecraft. Fine, $120. Deadline, 48 hours. My boat sat behind the cabin on a small, covered trailer. It hadn't touched the water since we moved in, but that didn't matter. What mattered was pressure, Linda's preferred language. The next week brought the social punches. Colton came home quiet, shoulders tight, eyes shining with something he didn't want me to see. When I finally coaxed it out of him, he said one of the kids in the fishing group told him he wasn't allowed to join because his dad doesn't follow the rules. The fishing group, I later learned, was run by none other than Linda Harwood. That night, I sat on the porch, listening to the lake lap against the rocks, while the wind carried the thin whistle of needles shaking at the treetops. I felt a kind of slow, simmering anger, not the kind that explodes outward, but the kind that digs its heels in, grows cold and patient. I'd dealt with people like Linda before in my engineering days, folks who believed authority was something they could manufacture from thin air. But back then, I never had a reason to push back. Now I did. Still, I needed evidence. More than my word. More than my memory. So I started a log. Each night after Colton went to bed, I recorded every complaint, every strange vehicle that drove past too slowly, every envelope left on my gate. I photographed the notices under good lighting. I printed receipts. I kept a binder the way an engineer keeps plans, systematic, precise, undeniable. By late October, the binder was over an inch thick. One evening, as the sun set pink and orange over the lake, casting long shadows across the porch, I saw a familiar shape. Linda herself, standing at the edge of her yard, arms folded, watching me through that razor-thin smile. Her house sat 2 lots down, but the tight line of her shoulders made the distance feel like inches. She raised her phone and snapped a picture. Click. Then another. Click. I didn't wave, didn't move. I just watched her lower the phone, turn sharply, and power walk back into her immaculate house. Calm, I reminded myself. Patience. But patience doesn't mean inaction. Later that week, I ran into Hank Barlow again as he chopped kindling beside his woodpile. The air smelled like sap and cold resin. "You holding up?" he asked, wiping his forehead with the back of his glove. "For now," I said, "but she's not letting up." He stuck another log on the stump and brought the axe down with a cracking thud. "She starts slow with everyone. Then she ramps up till you break or bend. Most folks bend." "I'm not most folks," I said. He studied me a moment, eyes narrowed beneath the shadow of his brim. "Then she picked the wrong man." I nodded. "I'm starting to think so." The wind shifted, carrying a slate-gray cloud across the lake. A loon cried somewhere distant. The first snowflake of the season drifted lazily toward the ground. By the time I walked back to the cabin, a township truck sat in my drive for the second time that month. The same inspector climbed out, shoulders slumped, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Mercer," he said, voice tired. "Another complaint." "What this time?" He checked his notes. "Improper light pollution from the porch, allegedly disturbing wildlife." I gestured toward the porch. One dim bulb glowed beneath the overhang. "That?" He dragged a hand down his face. "Look, off the record, someone has your address on speed dial." Then he signed off the inspection as unfounded and left. I stood there for a long time after he drove off, listening to the fading crunch of his tires in the snow-dusted dirt. The wind rattled the metal gutter, and the cold wrapped around me like a warning. This wasn't random. This wasn't accidental. This was deliberate, organized, constant. The water lapped quietly against the rocks, as if the lake itself was holding its breath. And that's when the notion hit me. Small at first, like a whisper drifting across the cold water. If Linda was going to build a case against me with fake authority, I needed to build a real one against her. The season of harassment had begun. But the season of evidence was coming next. And once it did, the entire block would see exactly who had crossed the wrong man. The breaking point arrived on a cold November morning. The kind where the air bites the inside of your nose and the lake exhales steam like a sleeping animal. Frost coated the dock planks, turning them into pale silver ribs under my boots. Colton trailed behind me, breath puffing in small white clouds as he carried his little tackle box. The world was quiet, honest quiet, the kind you only hear before sunlight makes an appearance. The only sound was the faint clicking of our reels and the soft drip of lake water sliding off the dock posts. Then came the footsteps, hard, fast, intentional. Before I could turn, Linda Harwood stormed down the wooden boards like a judge marching into a courtroom. Her sun visor sat crooked on her head, and she wore a matching Lululemon set that probably cost more than the used boat I bought last spring. Her face was scrunched in that permanent frown she wore whenever she felt power slipping through her fingers. "Stop! Stop right there!" she barked. Her voice shattered the morning calm like a dropped pane of glass. Colton flinched. I stepped in front of him on instinct. "What now, Linda?" I said, keeping my tone level. She pulled a laminated sheet from a plastic sleeve and waved it like a badge. "You are in violation of quiet hours. No waterfront activity before 9 a.m. That includes fishing, casting, dock usage, everything." I blinked slowly. "Quiet hours? Linda, this is my property. This entire lake is governed by the association," she snapped. "Your membership is mandatory whether you want it or not." I studied the laminated covenant. The paper smelled like printer ink and lemon hand sanitizer. Nothing official, nothing old, nothing real. It wasn't stamped, not signed, not recorded, just a document she cooked up in her living room and slapped plastic on. "That isn't a legal covenant," I said. "You can laminate fiction all you want, but it's still fiction." Her nostrils flared. "I'll be adding another violation. Refusal to comply with community regulations." I felt the tight pull of anger deep in my chest, the quiet kind that makes your hands want to clench. But I kept them loose at my sides, because people like Linda feed on explosions, and I refused to give her one. "I'm here with my son," I said softly. "Fishing. On my property. Leave us alone." Instead, she lifted her phone. Click. Click, click, photographs. Evidence she'd twist into whatever lie she needed next. "You'll be hearing from me," she hissed. "And from the board." "There is no board," I reminded her. She smiled, a thin, brittle little smile. "You'll find out just how real we are." Then she stomped back across the dock, every footfall pounding the wood like a gavel. Colton looked up at me. "Is she going to get us in trouble?" "No," I said, though a knot had already formed in my stomach. "She's trying to scare us, but she's the one making mistakes." After breakfast, while Colton worked on a school project at the kitchen table, I went searching through the cabin. A crawl space, a storage closet, under a row of warped floorboards near the back door. That place held layers of old lives, bundles of yellowing newspapers, a cracked lantern, rusted nails in jars, forgotten fishing lures. And then, tucked behind a broken crate, I found something interesting. A long cardboard tube, sealed at both ends with brittle masking tape. I peeled it open. Inside lay an old subdivision map, edges curled, ink faded from years of Montana winters. It smelled like dust, cedar, and time. A county recorder's stamp sat faint but visible in the corner, dated 1978. I spread it across the dining table, smoothing it carefully. The lake's outline appeared first, Lost Timber Lake drawn in careful blue ink, then the lots, the access strips, the easements. Property lines cut across the page like quiet secrets carved into paper. But the strange part? Several pieces of land were marked as developer-owned parcels, including the narrow strip behind Linda's house. and the road easement across the front lots. The map showed the original infrastructure of the entire block. And what it showed didn't match anything Linda was claiming. A current surged through me, half suspicion, half cold realization. I'd seen enough land plats and water rights documents in my engineering years to know this wasn't some minor quirk. This was the kind of forgotten detail people like Linda hope never sees daylight. As I traced a finger along the easement that cut right across Linda's property, the morning sunlight caught the dust motes hanging in the air, making the room glow faintly gold. A storm was coming for Linda, whether she knew it or not. Colton padded into the room. "Dad, what's that?" "A map," I said softly, rolling it back up. "One that's going to help us." "Help how?" I rested the tube on the table and looked out the window. Across the lake, Linda kept pretending she controlled. The wind curled across the surface, making patches of silver dance. "It shows the truth," I said, "and the truth is something she can't laminate." Colton grinned at the joke, not fully understanding, but knowing I had a plan. The deception of quiet hours was just another lie, a loud lie at that, but lies crumble when they meet the right piece of paper. I looked down at the old map one more time before tucking it in a safer place. Easements, parcels, access rights, things Linda had never bothered to learn. I exhaled slowly, a growing certainty settling into my bones. Evidence season had officially begun. And this map? It was only the first seed of the avalanche about to bury her entire fake kingdom. By the middle of November, the wind had shifted, colder now, sharper, carrying the sting of snow across Lost Timber Lake. The days grew shorter, the water darker, the tree line a fortress of black silhouettes against the sky. It was the kind of cold that crept into your coat sleeves and sat against your bones, quiet and uninvited. But I needed that cold. It kept me awake while everyone else slept. Most nights that week, after Colton had gone to bed and the cabin settled into its natural creaks and groans, I drove to the county recorder's office, the old brick building on Elm Street that smelled like dust-covered history and lemon floor polish. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I flipped through decades of yellowed documents, each page a breadcrumb leading me somewhere deeper. The clerks grew used to seeing me. One of them, a soft-spoken woman named Helen, started leaving the archive cabinet unlocked when I arrived, her way of saying she knew exactly what I was digging for, and maybe who I was digging into. Binder after binder, plat after plat, I pieced together the strange puzzle of Lost Timber Lake. The original developer, a company called North Shore Timberline Holdings, had gone bankrupt in the early 90s. A judge split the assets, some lots sold, others left in limbo, several bundled into foreclosure auctions. But those bundles, those messy stacks of overlooked parcels, held secrets. And they pointed to something bigger than an overzealous HOA president with too much time on her hands. On Thursday afternoon, Sheriff Cody Rellan showed up at my cabin unannounced. He carried his hat under his arm, chewing the inside of his cheek like a man with something heavy on his mind. The breeze carried a faint smell of pine resin and exhaust from his cruiser. "Evan," he said, "mind if I come in a minute?" I held the door for him. The wood stove crackled softly in the corner, filling the living room with warm amber light. He took off his gloves, exhaled, and met my eyes. "I wanted to touch base with you before Thanksgiving rolls around. Things have been heated. That's one word for it. I've gotten 6 more complaints," he said. "Noise, flooding, dock instability, suspicious behavior, none of them valid." "Let me guess," I said. "All filed by the same person." "I'm not supposed to say that." He gave a tired half smile. "But you're not wrong." The kettle whistled faintly in the kitchen. I poured us 2 cups of coffee, steam curling from the rims. He took his slowly, warming his hands. "Look," he said, voice dropping. "These are civil issues, Evan. HOA disputes, property lines. None of that's criminal unless there's fraud involved. And is there? He hesitated. If there is, I can't act until you've got solid proof. I thought about the map rolled in my desk, the deed fragments I'd copied, the missing incorporation records for Linda's so-called HOA, the scattered references in the bankruptcy files. I'm working on it, I said quietly. He nodded. Good. Because if Linda keeps escalating, I need something concrete to push back with. He finished his coffee, set the mug on the counter, and rested a hand on the doorframe before leaving. Evan, he said, looking back at me through the warm light of the cabin. Be careful. Linda may not have real authority, but she's got a real talent for stirring trouble. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me with the crackling fire and the whisper of wind against the windows. By the weekend, I knew I needed more than scattered evidence. I needed someone who understood the deeper layers of land law, someone who could pull the thread until the whole sweater came apart. So on Monday morning, under a sky the color of blue shale, I drove 2 towns over to the office of Mara Jensen, a property lawyer recommended by one of the clerks. Her office sat in an old converted bank building, arched windows, stone steps, brass door handles polished from decades of use. Inside, law books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. She wore a gray wool blazer, dark-rimmed glasses, and the expression of someone who could cut through red tape with a single sentence. So, she said, flipping through the stack of copies I'd brought, you're telling me an HOA is issuing fines without being registered with the state? Correct. And they claim lake authority, she said, sliding the map toward her, based on covenants that aren't stamped, signed, or recorded anywhere? Correct. She leaned back in her leather chair, eyebrows lifting. That's ambitious of them. That's one word for it. Mara tapped her finger on the old subdivision map. Where did you find this? In my cabin. The previous owner left it behind. Smart man, she said. This predates the HOA by decades. And look here, developer-owned parcels, road easement, common access strips. I nodded. Matches what I'm finding downtown. Mara removed her glasses and folded them carefully. Evan, you might own more than your cabin. The words hung in the air like a suspended breath. Outside her window, a gust of wind rattled the old branches lining the sidewalk. How much more? I asked. That depends on what the bankruptcy filings say, she replied. But if these parcels were never transferred legally, they would have reverted according to the final trustee ledger. And if they were bought at auction? Then the buyer owns every scrap of land listed here. My pulse thudded in my throat. Do we know who that is? Not yet, she said, but we will. She stacked the maps, the copies, the photographs of the violations I'd logged. I'll start digging. Give me a week. When I stepped outside into the cold afternoon, the wind pulled at my jacket and sent dust swirls skating across the old brick pavement. Snowflakes drifted from a pale sky overhead, melting the moment they touched the warm hood of my truck. I felt the first flicker of hope, small, bright, electric. Not because I wanted revenge, because I finally understood something. Bullies thrive on silence, but silence breaks when evidence speaks. And once evidence starts talking, even the loudest lies can't drown it out. I drove home as daylight thinned into a lavender dusk, the lake ahead rippling with icy wind. The world felt like it was holding still, waiting for something to give. Something was coming, something bigger than violations and laminated lies. Linda had pushed. Now the ground beneath her feet was beginning to shift, and she had no idea how deep the cracks ran. The first snowfall of the season arrived on a Thursday morning, thin white powder drifting across Lost Timber Lake and softening every edge of the shoreline. The world looked muffled, quiet, like someone had turned down the volume on life. But under that stillness, tension brewed thick in the air, like the smell of an approaching storm. I was splitting logs behind the cabin when the crunch of tires broke the calm. A gray SUV, one of those shiny crossover models with spotless tires and chrome trim, pulled up to my gate. The window slid down, and there she was. Linda Harwood. Her sunglasses reflected the snow-covered pines, but I could feel her glare like heat from a furnace. "Mr. Mercer," she said, voice sharp enough to cut thin ice. "We need to talk." I leaned the axe handle against a stump. "Morning to you too." She ignored the comment, flipped open a manila folder, and held out a stapled packet. The pages fluttered in the cold wind. "Emergency HOA meeting," she announced. "Tuesday at 7 o'clock. Attendance is mandatory. You have repeatedly violated community standards, and the board will be addressing disciplinary action." I glanced at the header. Lake Harmony Residential Association, Special Enforcement Session. "Mandatory?" I asked. "Even for non-members?" Her jaw tightened. "Everyone who lives on this block is a member." "Funny," I said. "The state disagrees." She bristled but didn't retreat. "If you fail to attend, the board will vote on additional fines." I folded the packet and slid it into my coat pocket. "See you Tuesday." Linda drove off in a whirl of snow and exhaust, her SUV fishtailing slightly on the icy road. As I watched her go, a strange calm settled over me. Not the peace of ignorance, but the calm that comes when you know how a story ends long before the villain does. That evening, I unrolled the old subdivision map on my dining table again, tracing the inked lines under the warm glow of the hanging lamp. Snow tapped softly against the window pane. The lake stretched black and silent outside, rimmed by frost like a sheet of obsidian. This map held truth, and soon, the room Linda thought she controlled would have to face it. By Saturday, Mara Jensen responded to my email with a short, pointed message. "We need to talk before the meeting." I drove to her office through light flurries, the truck heater struggling against the cold. Inside, Mara had spread out bankruptcy filings, court summaries, and scanned documents across her desk. She tapped one page with her pen. "I found the final asset disposition from North Shore Timberline Holdings," she said. "And Evan, those developer-owned parcels on your map weren't lost. They were bought." I leaned forward. "By who?" She handed me a copy of the buyer's ledger. The name printed there hit like a hammer. Mercer Holdings Trust. My heartbeat thundered. That was my grandfather's trust, the same trust that paid for my engineering school, the same trust my father managed until he passed. "That means," I said slowly. "You own all of it," Mara finished. "The access strips, the original easements, the developer parcels that the HOA has been pretending to manage." I stared at the paper, the ink slightly smudged around the edges. The trust had quietly held the land for decades. No one ever told me. No one told the neighbors. And certainly, no one told Linda. "So legally," Mara said, "the HOA has zero authority. Any authority they pretend to have is not only invalid, it's fraud." The wind howled outside the office window, rattling the old frames. Something settled inside me then, like the last piece of a heavy puzzle dropping into place. "Tuesday is going to be interesting," I murmured. The clubhouse sat 3 houses down from mine, an oversized shed someone had tried to disguise with flower boxes and a fake lantern above the door. The light flickered erratically as people filed in, breaths turning to mist in the early winter cold. I arrived with a sealed document tube under my arm. Hank Barlow nodded from the corner. A few other neighbors avoided my eyes, unsure whose side to take. Linda stood at the front of the room like a queen about to hold court. She'd set up folding chairs in neat rows, and a table behind her held a stack of violation notices like ammunition. She clapped her hands once. Everyone settle down. We need to begin. Her lawyers, 3 of them, all in black suits, sat stiffly behind her. The tallest one clicked a pen in his hand, scanning me like I was a problem to solve. Linda cleared her throat dramatically. We are here tonight to address repeated disregard for community standards by Mr. Evan Mercer. His ongoing violations threaten the integrity of Lake Harmony. I raised a hand. Before we start, I'd like to see your HOA's legal registration. The room went still. Neighbors looked at each other. The heating vents hummed weakly. One of Linda's lawyers shifted in his seat. What? She snapped. Registration, I repeated calmly. Bylaws, incorporation papers, anything proving that the Lake Harmony Residential Association exists in the eyes of the state of Montana. Her face paled. We don't need... Yes, I said. You do. Silence spread like frost across the room. One of the lawyers whispered into Linda's ear. Her lips went tight. Her nails dug into the folder she held. We don't have those documents with us, she finally said. This is a voluntary... This, I interrupted, is a fraud, and you know it. Gasps rippled through the room. Hank Barlow's eyebrows shot up. One neighbor dropped his pen. Linda slammed her binder shut. You sit down. You have no authority to... I reached into the tube, pulled out the old subdivision map, and unrolled it across the front table. The edges curled softly under the warm air. This, I said, tapping the map with my finger, is the truth, and we're not done. The room leaned in as the air grew sharp and expectant. The storm Linda had started had finally walked into her house, and now, standing in the heat of her own spotlight, she was about to watch everything unravel, one page at a time. The air inside the clubhouse felt heavier than it should have, thick with the smell of burnt coffee from the percolator in the back, the musk of winter jackets thawing near the heater, and the sour tang of nerves drifting off the people packed into folding chairs. Snow tapped lightly against the frosted windows, a faint, steady drumming like a heartbeat in the background. Linda stood at the front of the room, arms stiff, eyes darting between me, the map on the table, and the neighbors she once commanded like loyal subjects. The veneer of her confidence was cracking. You could see it in the way her left eye twitched, and the faint tremor in her hand each time she adjusted her binder. The tallest attorney cleared his throat, shifting in his chair. Mr. Mercer, this is highly irregular. Is it? I said, keeping my voice steady. Asking for proof of authority seems pretty reasonable, especially for an association that fines people, mandates dues, and calls law enforcement on families who don't bow to it. Gasps rippled gently through the room. A neighbor in the second row, Doris Henson, a retired teacher with hands always folded like she was ready to say grace, raised her eyebrows as if she'd just heard a forbidden word. Linda huffed, snatching the laminated covenant from her folder and slamming it onto the table. This is all we need. The quiet hours, the fishing limits, the maintenance charges. Everything is clearly outlined. I tapped the sheet with a finger. This wasn't filed with the county. It doesn't have to be, she insisted. I looked around the room, speaking to the neighbors now. Actually, it does. Any covenant that affects land use, lake access, or property rights has to be recorded. And this printed, laminated, homemade rulebook isn't worth more than the ink she used. Murmurs spread. People leaned closer. Hank, sitting near the back, crossed his arms and nodded once, slow and deliberate, a gesture that said, I told y'all. Linda's lead attorney stood, his voice low but firm. Mrs. Harwood, perhaps we should take a moment to... No, she snapped. We're not doing this. He moved in 6 months ago and thinks he can undo 12 years of our work. Linda, I said, you can't undo what never existed. Her cheeks flushed dark red. How dare you? I unrolled the map farther, revealing the curvature of Lost Timber Lake, the plotted lots surrounding it, and the thin, narrow parcels highlighted in faded yellow, the forgotten pieces the developer once held. "Everyone take a look," I said, pointing at the corner stamp. "This is the original 1978 subdivision map. Signed, stamped, recorded." People shifted in their seats. Jackets rustled. Someone whispered, "I haven't seen one of those in years." Linda recoiled as if the map itself were poisonous. "See these strips?" I said, tracing my finger along the inked edges. "These are easements, paths and accessways the developer retained for maintenance of the lake, roads, and shoreline. According to state law, those easements carry authority. Not any HOA, not any volunteer committee, not someone's idea of neighborhood control." I watched the realization flicker across the neighbors' faces, the slow dawning understanding that they had been paying into a fantasy. Linda's voice trembled as she spoke again, trying to claw back control. "Stop listening to him! This is misleading, outdated, irrelevant!" The shorter attorney cleared his throat. "Mrs. Harwood, do we have our own copies of these documents? Or any?" "No," she barked, rounding on him. "We have our rules, our standards." "And those standards," I said, cutting in gently, "need legal grounding." I reached into the cardboard tube one more time and pulled out the older, more fragile set of documents, the bankruptcy filings Mara had given me. The paper edges were soft, browned with age, stamped with the unmistakable seal of the county court. "And here," I said, laying them next to the map, "is where everything collapses." A hush swept across the room. Even the heater seemed to quiet. Back in the mid-90s, North Shore Timberline Holdings went bankrupt. Their assets, including these exact parcels, were auctioned. I placed a photocopy of the buyer's ledger on the table. "Do any of you recognize this name?" I asked. Everyone leaned forward, even Linda. There it was in black ink, Mercer Holdings Trust. "My grandfather's trust," I said calmly, "inherited by my father, and now owned by me." Linda took a shaky step back, her heel bumping the wall. Her hand shot out, gripping the chair beside her. "That's impossible," she whispered. "It's recorded with the county," I replied. "Stamped, filed, indisputable." One of her lawyers rubbed his forehead, muttering something to himself. I continued. "This trust owns every developer-held parcel, every easement, every access strip, every inch of land the HOA has been pretending to control." I pointed to the narrow parcel crossing the back of Linda's lot. "And that strip you've been calling community shoreline? It's mine." A sharp intake of breath echoed through the room. I heard Doris say, "My lord." "And the access road you've been issuing maintenance fees for?" I said. "Also mine." A low rumble of whispers swelled into the kind of collective outrage that fills a room when people realize they've been fooled for years. Hank uncrossed his arms, standing slowly. "So you're telling me we've been paying her money for a road she don't even own?" "Correct," I said. Linda shook her head, eyes wide and unblinking. No, this can't. No, this is my neighborhood." Neighbors turned toward her, some angry, some betrayed. A few wore expressions I'd only ever seen at funerals, mourning the trust they'd lost in someone they thought they knew. Linda jabbed a trembling finger at me. You planned this. You're trying to destroy everything I built." I stepped closer, not aggressive, just certain. "No, Linda. You did that yourself. I'm just holding up the mirror." Her breath came fast now. Her shoulders shook. Her voice cracked. "You don't belong here." I met her eyes. "Linda, I legally own the land under your feet." Silence swallowed the room whole. Her jaw opened and closed like she was searching for air. Her attorneys exchanged a look that said more than words ever could. They knew the battle was lost. Behind us, the clubhouse door creaked open. Sheriff Cody Rellan stepped inside, snow dusting his shoulders, hat still on. He scanned the stunned faces, the papers on the table, the bright red blotches of panic spreading across Linda's cheeks. "What's going on?" he asked. I turned to him slowly, the old map still stretched across the table, the ledger stamped clear as day. "Truth," I said. "A whole lot of truth." Cody walked closer, eyes narrowing at the documents. And then it hit him. He looked at Linda, then at me, then at the trembling covenant in her hands. "Linda," he said softly, "we need to talk." And just like that, the house of cards fell. The queen had lost her crown, and for the first time in 12 years, the block finally saw the woman behind the title. Not a leader, just a liar standing in the ruins of her own kingdom. The clubhouse stayed frozen in silence long after Sheriff Rellen's words settled over the room. Snow tapped against the windows like fingertips, steady and cold, punctuating the stillness that followed Linda's unraveling. Neighbors shifted uneasily in their folding chairs, as if afraid a single movement might shatter whatever fragile truth now hung between us. Linda stood rigid, hands trembling at her sides, eyes darting like a trapped animal searching for a way out of a cage she had built herself. The map lay spread across the table behind me, its faded ink illuminated under the buzzing fluorescent lights, every parcel and easement a reminder of her deception. Sheriff Rellen stepped carefully toward the table, boots creaking on the warped wooden floor. He studied the documents, gloved fingers brushing across the county stamps. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "About a week," I said. "Long enough to confirm everything with Mara Jensen." The sheriff exhaled heavily, like someone finally seeing the whole picture after months of staring at a puzzle with missing pieces. "We'll need statements," he said, "and every one of these documents scanned and recorded." "Already working on it," Mara said from behind me. She had slipped into the meeting unnoticed, holding a leather portfolio thick with notes and photocopies. "The county clerk will have duplicates by morning." Neighbors broke into hushed murmurs, words drifting like smoke. "You mean we paid her for nothing?" "All those fines." I knew something didn't feel right. My God, all these years. Linda clutched her binder to her chest. "Stop talking. You're all misunderstanding the situation." "No," I said softly. "They're finally understanding it." Her face flushed a deep, blotchy red. "This is harassment. You're twisting things. This map is old, outdated. You can't possibly think—" "The map," I said, unrolling the second document from my tube, "isn't the only evidence." This one was newer, photocopied pages from the auction files, the bankruptcy court's redistribution schedule, the stamped confirmation of asset transfers. "Here," I said, tapping the final page, "is the trustee ledger, the legal record of who purchased every unsold parcel, easement, and developer-owned strip around this lake." I slid the document toward her. Her eyes scanned the page, widening with each line until her voice cracked in a whisper. "No, no, this can't be." "It is," Mara said calmly. The name, Mercer Holdings Trust, sat at the center like an unmovable truth. The neighbors rose from their seats, drawing closer. Their faces hardened, not with anger alone, but something deeper. Betrayal, wounded trust, the kind that didn't heal easily. Doris Henson clutched her purse straps. "Linda, you said the HOA owned the lake access. You told us dues were required." "And they were," Linda snapped, clutching at fraying authority. "If I didn't step up, this place would have fallen apart. Someone had to maintain order." An older neighbor shook his head. "Order or control?" Linda shot him a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "This is my neighborhood." "No," I said, "it's ours. And the land behind your yard, the path you call community shoreline, that land belongs to the trust. And now it belongs to me." Sheriff Rellen turned to her, voice low. "Linda," I'm going to need your full accounting records for the past 12 years. She stiffened. I'm not giving you anything. It wasn't a request. He stepped closer, lowering his voice, though everyone could still hear. You called my deputies out here over nothing. You filed fraudulent complaints. You demanded enforcement of rules you had no authority to create. You're siding with him? She hissed. After everything I've done for this community? After everything you've done, he echoed. I'm doing my job. Her lip trembled, not with fear, but with disbelief that the world was no longer orbiting around her. I opened my folder one last time, withdrawing a copy of the trust summary. My grandfather didn't say much about his investments, I told the room, speaking not to punish her, but to inform everyone. But he believed in protecting land, keeping it in responsible hands. He purchased these parcels to prevent developers from carving up the lake. I unfolded a second map, one with updated county lines overlaying the original plat. The room watched in stunned silence as the truth settled fully. This land remembers its owner, I said quietly, even when everyone else forgets. Snow kept falling outside, slow, steady, peaceful, an honest contrast to the storm breaking in the room. Linda staggered back, bumping into a chair. Her voice came out in a strained whisper. What happens now? Neighbors looked to me, then to Mara, then to the sheriff. For the first time, no one looked at Linda. Mara answered first. Now the county investigates. Restitution will be requested. Any funds collected under false authority will need to be returned. Some neighbors gasped in relief. Others rolled their shoulders like they'd been carrying a weight for years. And, I added, the land will be managed transparently. No more threats. No more fake fines. No more fear. Linda's knees buckled slightly. She gripped a chair, knuckles white, staring at the documents as if trying to will the ink to change. But ink doesn't lie. Maps don't lie. Land does not lie. Only people do. And tonight, her lies had reached their end. The heater clicked loudly as it shut off, leaving the room filled with nothing but the soft whisper of snow against the windows. Truth had finally taken its place, and the woman who once ruled the lake with an iron fist now stood alone, trembling on land she never had any claim to. The land always remembers, and tonight it finally spoke. But morning has a way of testing whether truth can survive daylight. And by sunrise the air above Lost Timber Lake felt heavier than any winter fog. Frost clung to the pine needles, brittle and sharp, the kind that cracks under the slightest pressure, just like Linda Harwood's empire was about to do. I woke before dawn, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of burnt coffee and the last of the documents spread out in clean rows. The house was quiet. Colton still asleep, heater humming low. The kind of quiet that comes before something irreversible. The weight of what came next pressed against my ribs, but not with fear, with purpose. Sheriff Rellin arrived at 8:14 a.m., his cruiser crunching over the crusted snow. When he stepped inside, he held a clipboard of forms and a pair of weary eyes that had clearly spent the night thinking. "All right," he said, rubbing the cold out of his hands. "Let's get your formal statements on record." The kitchen turned into a makeshift legal office. He recorded every detail, the complaints, the harassment, the fake rules, the meeting, the map, the trust papers. Every time he wrote something down, his jaw tightened a little more. Finally, he pushed the paperwork away and sat back. "This isn't just civil," he muttered. "This is fraud, intimidation, misuse of authority. Never seen anything like it. You have now." He didn't argue. By noon, the neighbors began showing up one by one to give their own statements. Betty arrived first, wrapped in a blue coat older than I was, carrying a folder of old checks and tear-stained notes. Hank came next with a binder full of printed emails. Even Doris and her husband, who rarely left their house, shuffled in with a stack of receipts. Every story matched the next. Every payment matched the next. Every threat matched the next. It was a mosaic of fear, and Linda had painted every tile. By mid-afternoon, the sheriff's office had enough evidence to fill an entire drawer, and Mara Jensen arrived to stack it neatly into legal order. Her boots tracked melted snow onto the floor. Evan, every homeowner in this block has grounds for restitution, some for damages, maybe even punitive. And the criminal side? I asked. That, Mara said, is already in motion. She wasn't exaggerating. At exactly 4:07 p.m., a county investigator stepped out of a black SUV and walked straight into Linda's house across the road. The sound of his knock echoed all the way to my porch. Curtains shifted throughout the block as neighbors peeked out. Mara and I watched from my window, the sky glowing with cold gold as the sun started its descent. What followed was quiet, but not peaceful. Quiet like someone realizing they're cornered. 20 minutes later, the investigator walked out with 2 boxes of files, Linda's files. She stumbled behind him, face blotched, hair unpinned, voice shaking as she tried to argue. I didn't steal anything. Everything I did was for the neighborhood. The investigator didn't respond, just shut the SUV door and drove away with a low rumble that felt like judgment itself. Then Linda saw me standing on my porch. She froze. Her voice cracked across the icy air. You ruined my life. No, I said calmly. You did that all on your own. She stood trembling, snow drifting around her like ash around a fire that had burned too long. You can't take everything from me, she whispered, almost to herself. This neighborhood, this block, it's mine. It never was. She backed up a step, breath fogging sharply in front of her. For the first time since I'd moved in, I saw her not as a tyrant, but as someone who'd built her identity on sand and now watched the tide wash it all away. Before she could speak again, Sheriff Relin pulled into her driveway, stepped out, and approached her with a somber look. Linda Harwood, he said, I need to inform you that the county is opening a formal fraud investigation. I'm going to ask you to remain available for questioning. You are not under arrest at this time, but you are not free to leave the county. The words struck harder than handcuffs. Her shoulders sagged, her chin wavered, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse into the snow. But she didn't. She lifted her head, eyes wet but burning. You think they'll side with you? She hissed. You're new. I've lived here 15 years. I built this community. You built fear, I said, and you used it. She inhaled sharply, as if my words had dragged the air right out of her lungs. Relin placed a gentle but firm hand on her arm. Ma'am, go inside. I'll contact you tomorrow. She turned and disappeared into her house, slow, defeated, but still clinging to whatever pride she had left. As the sheriff walked back toward his cruiser, he paused beside me. You handled this by the book, he said. If you'd blown up, if you'd snapped, she'd have used it. But you stayed patient. That's why this is going to stick. It wasn't patience, I said quietly. It was knowing what the truth weighs. He nodded once. Now the system moves, and this time, it's moving the right way. He drove off, tail lights glowing red against the snow. The block fell into stillness. Lights flicked on inside houses as evening settled. Doors opened as neighbors stepped out, drifting toward each other in small, cautious clusters. Someone knocked gently on my porch rail. It was Hank, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. Evan, whatever happens next, thank you. You did what none of us could. I shook my head. You all stood up today. That mattered. He nodded, eyes misty from cold or something heavier. But you started it. Through the falling snow, we watched Linda's house. Dark, silent, no movement. The kind of silence that comes after a storm breaks a structure down to the foundation. "What happens now?" Hank asked. I exhaled, watching the breath trail away. "Now," I said, "the law does what it should have done a long time ago." The night closed in, cold, crisp, and honest. A different kind of quiet settled over Lost Timber Lake. Not fear, not tension, just the space where justice prepares to land. And the woman who had ruled our block with threats was now standing on the edge of her own reckoning. Tomorrow, the consequences would begin. But tonight? Tonight, the land remembered its owner, and the law remembered its duty. But the true settling, the real quiet, didn't arrive until the snow melted off the pines, until the lake thawed into a sheet of glass that reflected back a neighborhood forever changed. Winter had carried away the noise, the lies, the power games. What remained was something almost unfamiliar. Peace. It didn't happen all at once. Justice rarely does. The very next morning, trucks rolled into Lost Timber Lake, county vehicles, investigator sedans, and eventually, a tow company hauling away Linda Harwood's gleaming SUV. The sound of chains tightening around those spotless white wheels echoed across the block like punctuation. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, some relieved, some stunned, some finally understanding the depth of what she'd done. I stood on my porch with a mug of hot coffee, steam rising into the crisp Montana air. The lake behind me shimmered silver blue in the morning cold. From the road, Mara Jensen approached, scarf whipping in the wind. "It's starting," she said, nodding toward the tow truck. "What about the restitution letters?" I asked. "Already filed. She's required to pay full refunds to every homeowner she extorted, with interest." I exhaled slowly. "That'll bury her financially." "That's not your concern anymore," Mara replied. "You didn't choose the consequences. She did." Across the road, Linda's front door flew open. She charged out, hair unbrushed, voice hoarse from a night spent crying or yelling or both. "You can't take that!" she shrieked at the tow operator. "That car is mine!" "Ma'am," he said calmly, "this order came from your bank, not us." Her eyes darted to me, red, wild, lost. "This is your fault," she spat. "You destroyed everything I built." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move. I simply said, "You didn't build anything. You stole it." The truth hit her harder than any sheriff's words. She staggered back, gripping her mailbox as if it could anchor her. But nothing could. Not anymore. By noon, a county officer served formal misdemeanor charges: fraud, financial misrepresentation, unlawful solicitation. The kind of charges that don't just cost money. They choke reputations, especially in small towns like ours. Her husband left 2 hours later, suitcases in the back of his sedan. No goodbye. No backward glance. The kingdom she'd ruled for over a decade crumbled in a single week. 3 weeks passed. The snow melted into mud. The mud dried into dust. The dust settled into quiet. For the first time since moving here, the block actually felt like a neighborhood. Betty stopped by with muffins. Hank borrowed my ladder and brought it back the same day. Kids rode bikes down the access road Linda once claimed to own. And I was finally breathing again. Colton and I spent evenings on the dock, watching the sun disappear behind the pine ridge. He asked fewer questions about why the sheriff used to come, why neighbors avoided us, why people could be cruel in the name of rules they invented themselves. One night, sitting beside him on the dock, with our feet hanging over the water, he asked quietly, "Is she gone for good?" "Yes," I said. "She won't be coming back." He nodded, satisfied in that simple, clean way kids accept justice when they see it. Spring brought the final closure. The Harwood house, once immaculate, once staged for intimidation with shining windows and trimmed hedges, went up for sale. It sat on the market barely 2 weeks before a young family bought it. They moved in with a golden retriever and a minivan full of toys. The laughter coming from that porch was something the block hadn't heard in years. On signing day, the realtor placed the deed on my hood so the buyers could verify property line notes. Funny thing, seeing that deed. Knowing the access road beneath their tires was mine. Knowing the path behind their yard was mine. Knowing the lake easement stretching out like a silver ribbon belonged to a trust with my name on it. Not for control, not for power, but for protection. Mara called it the most responsible use of inherited leverage she'd ever seen. I didn't need the compliment. The peace in this place was enough. By early summer, I organized a voluntary lake committee, a real one, with bylaws, elections, transparency. The neighbors voted for a modest annual fund for road maintenance and shoreline cleanup. Hank volunteered to supervise the gravel repairs. Betty handled finances, and I took the role of chairman, even though they insisted on calling it something less formal. Mostly, it meant I got to host the 4th of July barbecue. On that warm evening, with the sky turning orange and the lake catching firelight reflections from 100 sparklers, I stood at the edge of the dock, hands resting on the railing I'd rebuilt myself. Colton tugged my sleeve. "Dad, did we win?" I looked out at the lake. The quiet water, the neighbors laughing, the absence of fear. "We didn't win," I told him softly. "We just set things right." He smiled like that made even more sense. Behind us, kids splashed in the shallows. Adults chatted over paper plates and plastic cups. Music drifted from someone's speaker. Old country, the kind that sounds like open land and long memory. And in that moment, Lost Timber Lake felt exactly like the home I'd hoped for the day I moved in. When the fireworks ended and the lake settled into silence again, I remained on the dock. The wood creaked under my boots. The night air smelled of pine and smoke and possibility. I whispered to no one in particular. Land remembers its owner. Justice does too. And for the first time since I arrived in Montana, the lake answered not with tension, but with peace. A single ripple broke across the water's surface, a reminder that even quiet things have stories, and ours was finally, blessedly done. If you've ever stood your ground against someone who pushed too far, drop a simple justice in the comments so others know they're not alone. And if you want more stories about folks defending what's theirs with nothing but truth and backbone, hit subscribe and stick around. We've got plenty more coming.